We encourage you to hit the subscribe button right now so you can listen to more podcasts of Operation Truth. Ladies and gentlemen, we do want to hear from you, so we encourage you to email us directly at operationtruthofficial@gmail.com. I want you to know that your messages are likely to be heard, addressed, and listened to on air.
Operation Truth, the show they don't want you to see. Now, here's your host, Lou.
Okay, hello everyone. This is Lou Palumbo, and with me as always is my co-host, my collaborator, and my co-conspirator, Tom Fuentes, a former assistant director of the FBI. And we once again have the pleasure of having Kevin Brock, another former assistant director of the FBI, who, by the way, was one of 10 senior executives, former, of the FBI. They constructed a letter. They generated a letter and sent it to our Congress, among others, because of their grave concern for the safety of this nation, which I don't think anyone, if they have a brain in their head, can equivocate this. You know, we're going to talk about in a few minutes, you know, Kevin was also the architect of an article that will, I think when you see the contents of this article, it'll give you a real good understanding of what the Democrats are up to in this country. And it's not something that's consistent with the safety of this country. It's consistent with their attempt to gain control of this country, which I guarantee you we're experiencing the cusp of tyranny right now. When you try to prosecute your political opponent or prevent them from being able to run because they're not of your political favor. This is tyrannical behavior. We were cautioned in the second by our founding fathers, which is why we're armed in this country, because of the fear of tyranny and foreign invaders. But I want to start by saying to you, first of all, I'm gravely concerned about this country. I don't know if we're asleep at the wheel or sitting on our hands. I don't know how much we need to insult you before you see the forest for the trees. We had asylum seekers from the Democratic Republic of the Congo sexually abuse and unlawfully imprison an individual at a Best Western hotel near Buffalo Airport. This is not just local to New York. This is everywhere it's going on, guys. And for whatever reason, the media, and we understand why, are reluctant to disclose this information to the public. You know, I think that what the public has to understand is that the media and this political mechanism that's driving this country has basically no regard for you. And they just continue to insult you, and you just continue to take it. Now, I just want to say something about this border deal that they keep alluding to, that the Republicans are sidestepping. Guys, I encourage anyone that's interested, read the border deal. You know, part of what it suggests, just so we're clear, is that we allow 5,000 migrants to access this country on a daily basis. If you multiply that times 365, it's 1,825 people a year. Please double that. That'll bring you to 3.6. If you double that number, you're now dealing with 7.2 million people on top of the 15 million people we have in the country right now. Now, I want to go to Kevin because the significance of numbers is something that he addressed in an article that he recently wrote regarding a ruling that Biden put in, something he wanted to enact, I believe the second day after he was sworn in. Kevin, can I come to you, please, sir, regarding this?
Yeah, absolutely. Thanks, Lou. Good to be with you again. And you're alluding to an executive order that Joe Biden signed actually on his first day in office on January 20th, 2021. It was the second executive order that he signed. The first one had to do with abortion. The second order mandated that in the next census in 2030, that every inhabitant, everybody found inside the United States be counted as a matter of the census, rather than traditionally U.S. citizens or permanent resident aliens. What this does, because the census forms the basis for determining the number of representatives in Congress and subsequently electoral college votes, this was an obvious ploy, or when you look at that executive order now 3 years later through the lens of the open border policy of the Biden administration, it seems to be an obvious ploy to increase Democrat Party power. The travesty of all of this is that raw political power is being pursued above, as a priority, above the safety and security of the people of the United States. And Lou, you just read a litany of attacks that we have suffered in this country, and it was by no means a complete list that goes on and on. We know that from DHS statistics over the last 3 years, there have been over 90,000 individuals encountered at the border who have previous criminal histories from whence they came. We don't know what happened to those people. Hopefully they were turned away. Some may have been paroled into the country. We're not completely sure. What we do know is that there's been a tremendous spike in crime against America, the people here in America, over the last 3 years. Violent crime, murders, such as the recent murder of the young student at University of Georgia a couple of weeks ago by a Venezuelan illegal immigrant. And that is just representative of scores of violent crime, murders, sexual assaults against women and children that have occurred in this country over the recent past, none of which would have occurred if we had had secured border. All those people would be alive and unmolested today. What we can also presume is that if this policy persists, more people will be killed in this country. More people will be violently assaulted and sexually assaulted in this country who wouldn't otherwise be if the borders were secure. So we have to ask ourselves, what kind of conscience is so dull that they would place political power, political ambition above the safety and freedom from crime of people in the United States? That's the safety issue. There's a second part that the DHS is supposed to protect us from, and that is national security issues. And we now know, and we talked about this in the last podcast, but just to reinforce, we now know that there have been tens of thousands of unaccompanied, single, military-age males who have come to this country. Again, it is unclear as to their status, whether they were admitted, turned away, paroled into this country. We do know that DHS itself estimates over close to 2 million gotaways, or those who weren't encountered that came through our borders. So if we use a representative percentage of those, a similar percentage, we know that there are a number of these young men in this country now. We know that in at the San Diego illegal border crossing alone, and I got these fresh statistics from DHS today, since October, there's been 21,000 Chinese national young men encountered at the border. So we know there's been probably upwards of 30,000 in total that have come to this country from a country that is not known for allowing mass emigration. These people are coming here not because they're rich and can afford the freight to get here, but they have been allowed to come as part of a Chinese plan to operationalize assets in this country should they need to be called upon if hostilities increase between our two countries. I'll pause there for questions or comments.
Yeah, you know what, Kevin, these numbers about how many people are in the country, if we're going to tell the truth to the American public, which seems to be something we've chosen to just step away from, we have no idea how many people have accessed this country. Last week, I heard the head of ICE, I believe it was, say that we have areas along our border that are completely unmonitored and that there's access going on. We're talking about right now, since Texas put up this razor wire, that the migrants have now gravitated towards the west, towards the border of California, Jocumba and San Ysidro, and they're starting to flood California. But where I really want to go with this, guys, is that these are all symptoms of the problem. Where's the morality the courage, the honor, the integrity that we're supposed to devote to this country and the people who are its citizens? There's a bigger question here. And by the way, Biden should be charged with treason. If I heard your FBI director correctly, Christopher Wray, 8 or 9 months ago, where he clearly identified the southern border of the United States as a threat to our national security. And by the way, every 12 hours, they're opening up a case regarding China's activities in this country. We're saying this redundantly to the public in this podcast. My question is, at what point do you get off your haunches and start to put your attention in the direction that's going to preserve the future of your children? Now, I want to ask you something about this. I want to transition for 1 second into this Section 702 of FISA. You had brought that up in a conversation with me, Kevin, independent of the podcast, which I think is of interest to the public. I'd like you to start, and then I want Tom to critique this as well, because I know Tom is very literate in this area. Go ahead, Kevin.
Absolutely. And just to finish the point, and then we'll move to 702, because you raise an interesting question. Is this policy a treasonous policy? And you could draw an analogy to World War II. Had FDR at the time decided that an invasion from Germany or Japan was not going to be resisted by the U.S. military, that there was going to be a unilateral, not a surrender, but just allow the invasion to occur, would that have been a treasonous act? Most people would probably say yes. So there are parallels to be drawn in history. Section 702 is not well known among the people of the United States. They hear reports about Congress debating whether or not this Section 702 should be renewed. It is a section of the Foreign Intelligence Surveillance Act that gets re-examined every few years to determine whether or not the authorities that are granted to the U.S. government, to the intelligence community and the FBI, are still apt, need to be expanded or contracted based on circumstances. This particular section allows the National Security Agency to capture American telephone numbers, which they are not otherwise allowed to do. They're not allowed to listen to domestic phone conversations or monitor the calls made from this country. But there are numbers in this country that are in contact with numbers of interest overseas, generally associated with terrorism subjects, known or suspected terrorism subjects who are placing calls into the United States, or people in the United States placing calls to them. So these calls are captured, and that data is held, and the FBI is enabled under this section to make queries of this database when they have an individual of interest, a predicated individual of interest or entity in this country that they're investigating, to see with whom those persons of interest may have been in contact with, as far as known or suspected terrorists go. So it became controversial in the recent past because of oversteps perceived by Congress that the FBI was using this database to monitor the activities of Americans in an unjustified manner. And so the Republicans in the House of Representatives in particular are holding hearings and examining whether or not those perceived abuses should be reined in by restricting the authorities under Section 702. And Tom, I know you've studied this topic, so I'll ask you to add on as well.
Okay. Well,
Go ahead, Tom. I'm sorry. Go ahead, Tom.
One of the points of that, Kevin, is that it's not just Congress that questioned FBI abuse of that provision. It was the FISA court judges themselves that cited hundreds of cases. They sent letters to the FBI, to the Department of Justice, that this provision is being abused and corrections should be made. And at the time, this goes back several years, Christopher Wray, oh yeah, we're going to straighten this out. We're not going to allow this and all of that. And then what happens is that you have the continuation of the provisions that according to the court, are still being abused. And now you have Congress, because it's time to reauthorize the provision, saying, wait a minute, the courts have said you've abused this. You want us to authorize, this is a highly, difficult area for U.S. citizens to get caught up in. And the FBI has committed abuses. One of the classics was when the FBI wanted FISA wiretaps on Carter Page, who was believed to be, associated with the Trump campaign. And Carter Page was meeting with a number of people from Russia. He was doing a lot of these types of meetings that the FBI picked up from FBI surveillance or surveillance by other partners, such as MI6 in London, the British service. And so the FBI, one of its attorneys, Kleinsmith, sends a letter to CIA headquarters just asking, is this guy working for you? In which case, we won't open a case on him because he's doing what he's doing on behalf of the United States. CIA sends the letter back saying, no. I'm sorry, they send the letter, yes. Kleinsmith changes that to no. So the court is misled into believing what Carter Page is doing that is so suspicious. He's not doing that on behalf of the United States. He's not doing that as an operator tasked by CIA. He's on his own, and therefore we should wiretap him. And they did. And it was later even renewed under that authority. So these are the type of cases that the FBI has abused repeatedly, going back several years. And then whenever the question comes up by Congress, or they hold hearings and, should we reauthorize this provision to give the FBI this policy that they continue to abuse? And then many people say, we have to, or the U.S. will be, attacked and killed, and we need this provision to safeguard the national security of the United States. Now, I should add for the viewers, there's two types of wiretaps that the FBI can engage in. One is under the Foreign Intelligence Surveillance Act, FISA, for issues concerning national security. It's supposed to be to go after foreigners who might be a threat to our security, and it can include U.S. citizens if they're dealing with those foreigners, and it's very suspicious that they could be working against the United States. The other type of wiretap is criminal wiretaps, typically used in organized crime. Now, in the 90s to the early 2000s, I ran the FBI's organized crime program. I had to review and authorize hundreds of wiretaps from around the country. Those were committed with probable cause under a provision of the Omnibus Crime Control Act of 1968. Within that act, Title III specified how, with certain crimes being violated, the FBI or other federal agencies could use electronic surveillance. So that technique just became nicknamed Title III. And I oversaw hundreds of Title III cases. Now, in that, you have to specify probable cause to the Chief Justice of the district you're in, or the violation is occurring in. So that's a different situation than FISA. FISA, in a way, is more lenient because you're talking about the security of the United States. But the FBI has repeatedly been warned by the FISA court, stop abusing this provision. And they keep doing it, and they have kept on doing it.
Can I just say one thing to both of you gentlemen? Because, certainly this is clearly your lane based on your career commitments. I wonder if the FBI is applying this concept that I refer to as the greater good. And I want to say this in very gentle context. Back in yesteryear, before the police was so heavily scrutinized, even to the extent that, you couldn't talk to the public based on rules and regulations, you could get disciplined. It wasn't uncommon to conduct illegal searches of vehicles, for example, when you were pretty sure they had weapons in them. Clearly, we were violating somebody's rights, but we were working towards the greater good of getting the gun off the street and demonstrating the fact that we were prepared to do whatever it might take, even outside the scope of the law, to keep the public safe. I know it's wrong, guys, but this is the real world we're living in. Part of the problem with the country today is we're not living in the real world. You know, so if I hear both of you gentlemen correctly, there have been a multitude of abuses of FISA by the FBI over a protracted period of time, and there seems to be no stopping, you know, at this point. Is that a correct assumption, Tom?
Yeah. So what you're saying is they should just give up and say, okay, go ahead and cheat, lie, steal, do whatever for the greater good.
No, sir.
Is that what you're saying?
No, sir. No, sir. What I was saying is that there's a mentality that does exist in our world, Tom, regarding the greater good. And I know, without getting too revealing, that individuals do employ that. It's not right. I agree with you, especially something that deals with behavior that we should have grave concern about. Look, we're looking at the abuses that are taking place right now with this prosecution of January 6th. You know, all of our antennas should be raised up. And I keep saying this about the public. You know, when are you going to pull your heads out of your heinies and take a look at your country and the direction it's going? You know, and this, what you're really telling me, Tom, is this is another example of something that the majority of this country are oblivious to. Now, I'm going to be truthful. I'm familiar with FISA, not to the extent that you gentlemen are, you and Kevin. I've understood the premise of abuse, but you know, we're an anomaly, Tom, is my concern. I'm looking at the country that are just sitting on their hands here, and it's an abuse. It's an abuse at the border. It's an abuse by the media. It's abuse by the Democrats trying to create additional congressional districts so they can have more representation in the House. It's the abuse of the Democrats by trying to block a candidate who's the leading candidate, like him or not. This is not about Donald Trump, ladies and gentlemen. This is about our country. It could be Donald Trump today and you tomorrow. This is the problem. All you've got to do is get on the radar screen. I go back and I say this to you. This is an unrecognizable Democrat party. John Kennedy's probably rolling in his grave to see the direction that this party has taken. I want to just for one moment, guys, if you would allow me to, I listened to an explanation in the media as to why we should allow migrants into the country. I don't mean to digress back to the border, but I want to say something that I'm having a hard time understanding, like a lot of things in this country. We need to have more migrants in the country because our population growth isn't taking place. So by letting them in, they will populate the country. Here's my question, moron that I am, by admission. Why are we not encouraging our own populace to increase the number of individuals that we're bringing into the country? Why are we encouraging people from outside our borders to come in and populate our country? I don't know if I fell off the back of an Apple truck, but I listen to people speak, and I sometimes wonder, do you hear what you're saying? People from third world nations should come here, populate the country, because our population isn't growing to in a satisfactory pace. But don't encourage our population to bring more children into the world. Number one. Number two, guys, and I want to finish saying this, take a good look at the condition of this country and the condition of this world. I don't know if anybody's sane, rational, or reasonable will bring a child into this, because all of us, you, myself, Kevin, Chris Schwecker, any number of us that are invested in what we're doing here today are doing it because of our children. Not because, Tom, you need to be heard and seen. You had your day in the sun. I know you did as well, Kevin, based on your career and your endeavors. I know I have. This is about the future of our children and the future of this country. I don't know where this conversation begins or ends, but if the public doesn't hear what you gentlemen just said about FISA, don't complain when you find out that your civil rights have been violated. You know, there's that expression, absolute power corrupts absolutely. Maybe that's what we're living. We're going to take a quick break, ladies and gentlemen. When we come back, we're going to continue this conversation. I want to bump into the border discussion again because Kevin Brock brought up a very interesting point about technology and how it aids law enforcement today. You know, I have another just general question that I don't hear the Republicans ever bring up. Why isn't everyone accessing this country required to provide their DNA and their fingerprints? Because Kevin's concern is that we need more mechanisms to help law enforcement solve crimes, which ties into the comment I just made. We're going to be right back, guys. This is Operation Truth. Please communicate with myself, Kevin, Tom, TJ, whomever you so choose. It's OperationTruthOfficial@gmail.com. Again, OperationTruthOfficial@gmail.com. Please become part of this conversation. You know, we're pursuing a larger platform. At this point, I don't know if we should go on the road like a campaign and start to go city by city, maybe collegiate environment after collegiate environment, and start to speak to our children truthfully about all of these topics. Because what I'm living in America today is one big lie. We'll be right back, guys. Stay with us.
Hi, everyone. I am TJ Stone, the producer of Operation Truth, and I'm just taking a moment here to remind you to go follow us at Operation Truth Official on TikTok, and you can find us at Operation Truth Official on Facebook. We're on Instagram. We don't do as much on Instagram for reasons. On X, formerly known as Twitter, you can find us at Operation Truth and the number 7, Operation Truth 7, and always email us at operationtruthofficial@gmail.com. Be a part of this conversation. Join the operation.
We're back, and I want to bring Kevin Brock back in because I'd like to ask Kevin what exactly he thinks should be done moving forward in light of these circumstances that we're bumping into on a daily basis. Kevin, are you there?
I am. Thanks, Lou. So, yeah, and we touched upon this in the letter that we sent to Congress. Having been presented with the fact that there have been tens of thousands of single military-age males come to the United States, possibly released into the United States, also those who were never encountered who have come to the United States, that represents a sizable number of individuals from terror regions, from countries that are state sponsors of terror, or from China, or from Russia, or maybe other countries that have inimical interests to the United States. The FBI, under its counterintelligence authorities, which are granted to it under Title 50, has a responsibility, in my mind, to identify who these individuals are. Now, they can do this in a number of ways. They can set up camp down at the border along with the Border Protection and interview these individuals as they come across. They can get identifying information on those who may have been released into this country and initiate essentially a fugitive investigation to find these individuals and interview them. The main purpose is, number one, is to find out whether any of these individuals have received tasking from a foreign power, whether it's the communist Chinese government, whether it's Hamas, or some other hostile foreign entity, to determine whether they are to be operationalized in any respect at any point. The FBI knows how to do this. It will not be hard to determine whether or not any of these individuals are here with contingent operational orders. So this must be done, and Congress, in its oversight role, should insist that it be done. Then these individuals, if it's determined that there are reasons why they shouldn't be in the country, process should be immediately undertaken to apprehend, sequester them, and hold them sequestered until they're removed from the country. This is a threat that's too serious to ignore. Tangential to that, under the topic of what should be done at this point, we have tolerated in this country an attitude by certain local police departments and sheriff's offices not to honor detainers that have been placed on individuals here illegally by the federal government. And those people are then subsequently released by these local jurisdictions, often in cities that are run by progressive administrations, and in many cases go on to commit crimes. My question is, the refusal on the part of local law enforcement to honor these federal detentions, does it amount to or rise to an obstruction of justice consideration?
Kevin, can I interrupt you for a second?
On that. So
I want to interrupt for a second about that point you just made. it isn't local law enforcement that's interfering with the process. It's a local government, because I have a gentleman, and he's now retired. It was an LAPD detective supervisor who worked for me privately for quite a number of years and was involved in security details like the Golden Globes and the Sinatras and a head of state when he visited. He told me that the LAPD were instructed by their mayor and by their city council not to cooperate with the federal agents. So I just want to qualify that it isn't local law enforcement, Kevin, that's reluctant to comply. It's the political environment that's reluctant to comply.
Lou, your point's taken, and in most cases you're exactly right, but there are instances, and look at the sheriff down in Atlanta, has made very bold statements about his refusal to honor these detention notices. So most of the time, and he's an elected official, he's not answerable to anybody except his constituency. So, it's we've seen instances on both sides.
And I appreciate you bringing that to light, because I suspect he's not the only one, Kevin. When we talk about what should be done, I have said we need to close the border temporarily so we can regroup. We can reassemble our assets to put together a plan or some form of addressment for people who want to access the country legally, quote unquote. I've also said that we need to, in light of the times and conditions in this country, in this world, collect DNA and fingerprints from everybody that wants to enter the country. Now, just so you know, everyone, they've got my DNA and my fingerprints. Please know they have Tom's and they have Kevin's, as well as everyone in the FBI. In the state of New York, if you're a teacher, if you work on the stock market, any of these sensitive jobs, they've got identifiers for us. Why would there be any reluctance today? And I would like both your opinion and Tom's opinion about collecting DNA and collecting fingerprints and creating a database on everybody coming in. So to go piggyback your discussion, Kevin, about technology and how it could facilitate an easier problem-solving mechanism, why wouldn't we do that? Kevin, what do you feel about that?
Politics. And it runs inconsistently across the country, but there's a very powerful voice with the ACLU and other entities that have a lot of equities in the media and with politicians in this country on the left. So that's the only impediment. There is no constitutional right that's granted to people from foreign countries coming here and appearing at our borders. And even after they're in the country, their rights are limited compared to those who are U.S. citizens or permanent resident aliens. They have some rights of judicial due process, but there are distinctions there. So there's really no impediment to collecting that data. It's just political will. And
that data is collected. People that are trying to apply legally to get into the country, whether you're applying for the visa to come in now, or especially if it's a visa to get married. My wife and I just went through this in the past 10 years ago about. And during that process, when you apply for that particular type of visa, before you can enter the country, your DNA is submitted and it's collected by immigration. You're put through an exhaustive physical exam at an approved facility by the government in what other country that you're trying to enter from. In her case, coming in from Canada as a Canadian citizen. Then she gets here, and in order to get the green card, which means permanent residency, another DNA sample is taken. Then along and another physical exams and other stuff is done then. So she had to submit to that repeatedly during the process, and then the final process before becoming a citizen, do it again. And also during that process to submit certified police records from every country she had ever lived in during her lifetime. So the country of birth, other countries where you went to school or worked or whatever, Canada, and then the United States. So these procedures are done if you're coming in legally. They're not done when you have a steamroll the border and have gotaways and everything else. That's the difference. So If you're trying to come in this country and have legal status, your DNA is taken.
So my expectation is not unreasonable, Tom. You know, in other words, you are alluding to the fact that there has to be a database in existence already that retains DNA. You
well,
just said
when they
yourself.
take the DNA, it's going into a database. If they've never collected your DNA before, then it's a start, like a fingerprint. Their fingerprints are also
Correct.
taken, so it goes into that database. Now, later, 2, 3, 5 years from now, if that person commits a crime, you know, they have fingerprints on file and DNA to match to it. So that's the provision of that, is the government has those records for everybody like that. Now, you're right. You and Kevin and I in law enforcement, we had to submit all of that way back when, in the old days. But in the modern era, modern being the last 10 years that at least I know about personally, if you're coming into this country, you're going to submit fingerprints, DNA, and other data.
Well, you just qualified that, Tom, by saying if you come in legally. You see, that's the fly in the ointment, ladies.
That's right. That's right.
Yeah. So my position is, regardless of your point of origin, if you come into our country legally, illegally, if we drop you in by parachute, I don't care how it is, we collect your DNA and your fingerprints, which, ladies and gentlemen, just for the record, might act as a bit of a deterrent, to be very candid with you, to start with. But for the purpose of law enforcement and addressing these criminal acts and conclusively deciding who may have participated in them, it's critical that they have this information. I don't hear any conversation about this, guys. You know, we're talking about the borders. I did hear Mayorkas say during the pandemic, 20% of the people coming into the country were infected. Didn't say they were returned. Don't know how that really worked out. But that the remaining percentage that come in were not required to be vaccinated. At the same time, we were firing police officers and military, nurses, any number of people that didn't want to comply with getting the vaccine. You know, the cuckoo's completely left the clock in this country, and we have to change the trajectory of this country through common sense, logic, reason, decency, and some respect. All of these concepts are no longer in existence. Guys, I have one set of rules universally applied, and 3 of us have already complied with something that's critically important in aiding law enforcement in a process of identifying who is actually participating in criminal acts. I'm just saying, everybody coming in today, especially in light of these discussions, that they're points of origin, and we have no ability to vet them, and your government doesn't care. They do not hesitate putting you at peril. That's why Kevin and 9 of his associates, former assistant directors of this FBI, generated a letter and submitted it to the Congress, among other places. Guys, we're going to close for today. We're going to be back again next week. I'm hoping, I know Tom will be here with me. I hope, Kevin, you can join us again if you can allocate some time. We're going to continue to beat this drum about the immigration issue. I think it's criminal, and I think that's the word that's starting to float around now, that we don't have a law enforcement mechanism present to facilitate deporting people when they cross the threshold. You know, I'm trying to understand, if you commit a crime in the United States, like, you know, I don't want to continue this podcast, guys, but something I do want to tell you. In this legislative bill that they're saying the Republicans don't want to sign, they want to make it okay if you're illegal in the country and you get arrested for driving while intoxicated. We're having incidents. I'm in Florida right now. We're having them here with illegal immigrants involved in drunk driving incidents, killing residents of the state of Florida. Fact check me, folks. I don't expect any of you who are listening or watching this to be spoon-fed by myself, Tom, Kevin, Chris, or anyone that's on this podcast. We want you to go out and get off your lazy rears and do some of your own due diligence. It will alarm you what's going on in your country. Another thing I want to hope to speak about in the next podcast deals with our young people, who we are so cavalier about labeling Generation X and Generation Z. These are generations that are being born into this country, that we have destroyed every institution that they need to believe in, that the 3 of us once did believe in: government, media, science, medicine, your educational institutions, your judicial system that we're bastardizing almost on a daily basis. I'm going to close for now, guys. I hope you gentlemen are back with me next week again. I know, Tom, you will be. Kevin, I hope that you are as well. We need to continue these conversations. You know, I try not to get too animated about this. I'm not angry. I'm disappointed. You know, I've had an incredible journey. I've had my share of adversity, and I've had an enormous amount of disappointment. And for me personally, I'm just disappointed for the young people here, guys. They're entitled to something better than this. Everyone in this country is entitled to something better than this. I don't know what's going on in this government, but November is a critical election. It will determine the face of this country moving forward. Please trust me. I'm not trying to scare you. This is your wake-up call. We'll be back next week. Thank you so much for joining us, guys.